Korr'Vesh crouched in the undergrowth, his obsidian-black eyes fixed on the strange creatures below. Humans, smaller than the Valkyrie, weaker by all appearances, yet they moved with an air of quiet confidence that unsettled him. They had landed on this world only days ago, their camp a fragile thing of fabric and steel, their tools oddly delicate for a species that dared to intrude upon a hunter's domain. And yet, despite their apparent frailty, the beasts of the land, predators whose instincts should have driven them to wariness or attack, regarded them with a peculiar kind of trust. It made no sense. The Valkyrie were apex hunters, towering figures of sinew and claw, their kind forged by eons of conflict with the natural order. Their cubs were raised in the harshest of conditions, taught that the weak perished, that survival demanded strength. And yet, from his vantage point, Korr'Vesh observed a human kneeling beside a wounded native beast, a large feline with dark, patterned fur. It should have lashed out, should have torn flesh from the soft, unarmored thing before it. Instead, the creature lay still, watching with something like understanding as the human pressed a strange tool against its injured leg. The machine emitted a soft hum, and within moments, the wound ceased to bleed. Korr'Vesh exhaled slowly, his mind working through the implications. The scene played out over and over in different ways. Humans mending wounds, offering food, extending hands to creatures that should have feared them. And each time, the response was the same. Trust where there should have been none. It was unnatural. A rustling to his left drew his attention. Korr'Vesh turned his head slightly and saw HFY, his second, watching as well. Unlike Korr'Vesh, HFY was younger, more prone to action before thought, and his claws twitched in barely restrained impatience. "They're soft," HFY murmured, voice low, unsuited for a world such as this. Korr'Vesh did not reply immediately. His instincts, sharpened by decades of survival, told him that softness was not the whole of it. The wind shifted, carrying with it the scent of blood, Valkyrie blood. The two warriors tensed, their attention snapping to the tree line beyond the human camp. A cub, small, barely past its first year, lay crumpled in the underbrush. It must have wandered too far from the nesting grounds and met something that it was not yet strong enough to fight. Korr'Vesh and HFY exchanged a glance. The cub's fate was sealed. Valkyrie law dictated that the wounded either rose again under their own strength or did not rise at all. To interfere was to weaken the lineage. But even as they watched, the humans saw it too. A cry went up, sharp, alarmed. Within moments, two of them hurried to the cub's side, their weapons conspicuously absent. One, a female with short-cropped hair and a cautious stance, knelt beside it. Her companion, a taller male, pressed his hand lightly against the cub's side, feeling for breath. Korr'Vesh's claws flexed into the dirt. The humans should have left it, should have let nature take its course. Instead, they moved with a purpose that defied understanding. They treated as they do the lesser creatures, HFY whispered, disgust curling his lip. The female reached into her pack, producing another one of their machines. The same hum as before. The cub flinched, its body tensing in pain, but the humans did not withdraw. They murmured soft, steady sounds, meaningless to Valkyrie ears, but unmistakable in their intent. They were comforting it. Korr'Vesh should have turned away. The cub was lost to them now, its fate stolen by alien hands. But something held him there, something strange and uneasy. He had seen mercy before, but this was different. This was deliberate, methodical, as if these creatures had spent their lives not in conquest, but in the careful mending of what was broken. The cub's breathing steadied. The bleeding slowed. The humans did not take it as a prize, did not claim it as their own. When the female rose to her feet, she gestured toward the forest, toward home. A test. The cub hesitated, then, unsteady but alive, it took a step, and another. It did not fear them. It did not flinch from what should have been a predator in human skin. Korr'Vesh forced himself to release the breath he had not realized he was holding. He turned away, motioning for HFY to follow. They slipped back into the trees, shadows fading into deeper shadow, but his mind did not leave what he had seen. These humans did not take what was weak and discard it. They did not exploit the trust of lesser beasts, nor twist it into control. They protected, and perhaps that was the most dangerous thing of all. Night had settled over the jungle, thick with the scent of damp earth and the distant cries of unseen creatures. The humans had retreated to their camp, their fire casting flickering shadows against the walls of their strange fabric shelters. Korr'Vesh watched from the canopy above, his claws gripping the rough bark of a twisted branch. Below, the cub, the same one they had saved, rested near the humans, its sides rising and falling in slow, steady breaths. The sight still gnawed at him. The cub should have feared them, should have fled back into the depths of the wild to heal or to die, as nature intended. Instead, it lingered, nestled in the circle of warmth and light these fragile creatures had built. Korr'Vesh wanted to believe it was simple foolishness, that the cub had not yet learned the lessons of its kind. But deep within him, in a place untouched by logic, something colder whispered, "Asterisk, this is not foolishness. This is something else. Asterisk." A shift in the air, the kind that did not come from wind. Korr'Vesh stiffened, his instincts raking at him with silent warning. He was not the only predator in the dark tonight. A shadow moved beyond the camp, silent but purposeful. Then another, and another. Not Varkari. Korr'Vesh bared his teeth, recognizing the sickly, chitinous forms slinking through the undergrowth. Chyrex, scavengers and murderers. They did not hunt for the thrill, nor for the balance of the world. They killed to erase, to purge, to leave nothing in their wake. And now, they were here. A part of him almost welcomed it. The humans were outsiders. They had no claim to this land, no right to interfere in the ways of the wild. If they perished, it would be a lesson well learned. But then his gaze flickered to the cub, still too weak to run, still trusting in the circle of light that would not protect it. The Chyrex moved closer. A choice. Korr'Vesh did not hesitate. He dropped from the branch without a sound, landing between the shadows and the camp. The nearest Chyrex recoiled, its pale, skeletal head twitching in surprise, but recovered quickly, baring its serrated fangs. A soft click echoed through the darkness as its talons flexed. A challenge. Korr'Vesh answered with violence. His claws tore through the creature's chest before it could react, its shriek a gurgling rasp that barely escaped its throat. The others surged forward, a tide of chitin and malice. But Korr'Vesh met them with the fury of a predator whose kill had been interrupted. A blur of movement to his side. HFY had joined the fray, his blade flashing in the dim light as he ripped through their ranks. The Chyrex had numbers, but they had never been creatures of strategy, only brute force and hunger. Against Varkari, they were nothing more than prey that had forgotten its place. A cry from the camp. One of the humans. The battle shifted in an instant. The Chyrex had not come for the Varkari. They had come for them. Korr'Vesh turned just in time to see the largest of the creatures burst into the firelight, its hollow eyes fixed on the wounded cub at the human's feet. The humans did not run. The female, the same one who had treated the cub, threw herself between it and the creature, a weapon in her hands, something that sparked and burned as she pulled the trigger. The shot struck true, sending the Chyrex reeling, but it was not enough. Korr'Vesh moved before he could think, his body a blur of instinct and fury. He slammed into the creature's side, sending it sprawling away from the human, and in one swift motion, he drove his claws into the soft space beneath its throat. The Chyrex spasmed once, then stilled. For a long moment, there was only silence. Then movement. The male human, weapon raised, scanning the darkness. The female, panting, eyes wide with something that was not quite fear. Korr'Vesh straightened, blood dripping from his claws. The firelight illuminated him now, fully visible for the first time. He saw the tension in their shoulders, the sharp calculation in their gazes. They were waiting to see if he would turn on them next. He did not. Instead, he looked down at the cub. It blinked up at him, small and unafraid. And Korr'Vesh understood. These humans did not stand their ground because they believed themselves strong. They did not fight because they were conquerors. They fought because something small and helpless had trusted them, and they refused to betray that trust. Korr'Vesh exhaled, slow and deliberate, before turning his gaze back to the female. "We are not your enemy," he said. The words felt foreign in his mouth, but they were true. She studied him for a moment, then lowered her weapon. Neither of them said anything more. There was no need. The scent of blood still lingered in the air, mingling with the charred bitterness of spent energy rounds and the damp earth of the jungle floor. Korr'Vesh stood in the fading glow of the human fire, his muscles still coiled with the tension of battle, but no more enemies came. The Chyrex had been driven back, their dead left as silent warnings in the undergrowth. The night would reclaim them soon enough. The humans were watching him, not with fear. No, that was the strangest thing. They should have been wary, should have seen him as just another predator, dangerous and unknowable. But the female, the one who had shielded the cub with her own fragile body, met his gaze with something else entirely. Understanding. The cub stirred at their feet. It had barely moved during the fight, its energy spent on survival, its trust placed in those who had no obligation to protect it. A foolish thing, Korr'Vesh would have thought once. But he had seen how the humans fought. Not for dominance, not for victory, but for the simple, inexplicable belief that the weak should not be abandoned. One of the humans crouched beside the cub, their hands gentle as they inspected its healing wounds. It let them, nuzzling briefly against their touch before curling into sleep. Korr'Vesh had seen Valkyrie cubs snap at their own kind for less. HFY was watching, too. He stood just beyond the fire's reach, half-shadowed, his eyes narrowed in calculation. When Korr'Vesh met his gaze, the younger warrior shook his head, a low growl rumbling in his throat. "You know what this means," HFY said, voice edged with caution. Korr'Vesh did. A cub that survived by another's hand was bound by the old ways to remain with them. A sign of weakness their ancestors had claimed. A failing. Yet he looked at the creature resting peacefully at the feet of these humans, and for the first time, he questioned whether those old ways had been right. He turned back to the female, inclining his head. "You saved it," he said, his voice rough, uncertain. She nodded, glancing at the cub before looking back at him. It wasn't a choice. Korr'Vesh studied her. The words were spoken simply, as if they required no explanation, but the weight behind them lingered. The same weight he had seen in their actions. The same weight he had seen in the way the beasts of this world, predators, hunters, creatures that should have known better, trusted them without hesitation. He thought of the way the Chyrex had attacked, not caring whether their prey was human or Valkyrie, only seeking to destroy. He thought of how the humans had stood their ground, not because they had anything to gain, but because something small and fragile had looked to them for safety. Perhaps the old ways were not wrong. Perhaps they were simply incomplete. Slowly, Korr'Vesh stepped forward. The humans tensed, but they did not back away. That, more than anything, cemented his decision. He crouched beside the cub, letting it scent him before resting a clawed hand lightly against its back. It barely stirred. "It will remain with you," he said at last. A flicker of surprise passed over the female's face, but she did not question it. Instead, she glanced at her companion, some unspoken understanding passing between them before she nodded. "Then we'll take care of it." The words settled something deep within Korr'Vesh, though he did not fully understand why. HFY made a frustrated sound, stepping forward at last. "And what will you tell the others?" he demanded. "That we abandoned a cub to outsiders? That we let them?" His voice faltered as he gestured toward the humans, as if the mere idea defied reason. Korr'Vesh did not look away. "I will tell them the truth." HFY scoffed, but there was no true anger in it, only uncertainty. He glanced at the humans again, at the cub curled in their care, at the firelight flickering across their strange, unreadable faces. Then, reluctantly, he nodded. "If the council exiles you, I will not follow." Korr'Vesh gave a rare, sharp smile. "Then let us hope they are willing to listen." The jungle was quiet now, the tension of the fight fading into the hush of the night. The humans had returned to their tasks, tending to wounds, speaking in low voices, but their gazes still flickered toward him, toward our HFY, toward the cub that had become more than a simple orphan in the span of a single night. They would leave this place soon. Korr'Vesh knew that. The humans did not linger where they were not welcome. But when they did, they would not leave alone. And for the first time, he was not certain if that was a loss or a beginning.